Well, hello everyone. Bill Molyneux here with Bill's History World with Goober the Traveling Bear, and we're with Mr. Nel the Historian. And Mr. Nel, where are we located?
Well, we're at the Maryland Veterans Museum here in Patriots Point, Maryland, and we're open 4 days a week. Um, I'd like for everybody to come down here, check us out. Yeah, I think you'll enjoy visiting here. We got a lot to show the general public.
Okay, and I think today you're going to show me around the World War II room and the different weapons that you have here.
Yeah, we're going to go briefly over the weapons that are used by both the Axis and the Allied forces. We're going to start with the Imperial Japanese forces. To start off, we have these two Arisaka Tsukyuin Sanjuhachi Tsukyuin Kyuju, which means Arisaka Type 38 and Type 99 rifles, or Soju, pronounced in Japanese. The Type 38 here above fired a 6.5 by 50 millimeter round, or 25 caliber round. It had been in service since the early 20s till the end of the war in 1945. Seen a lot of action during the Sino-Japanese War in the late 30s and in the undeclared war between the Soviet Union and Japan in Mongolia. And it was a very long rifle and very sturdy, very reliable. It used a German style, well, it had a German style Mauser bolt action, both rifles did. Now, the Type 99 had a heavier caliber, 7.7 by 58 or 303 caliber. During the Sino-Japanese conflict in the late 1930s, the Japanese found out that their Type 92 heavy machine gun, calibered in 7.7, had a better energy transfer than the 6.5. So basically, the 99 is an upgunned version of the 38, upgunned to 303. However, the 99 is a shorter rifle than the 38, and this model, though it's missing, many of the 99s had a folding wire monopod, which is supposed to be when the soldier is firing it in a prone position, gives them a steadies the rifle firing at a prone position. It turned out to be pretty useless. And the folding sight of the on the folding sight, the adjustable sight, the 99 also had they put in a anti-aircraft sight. Well, that was kind of wishful thinking. It proved to be also useless. Many of the troops removed that anti-aircraft sight. So here are the sidearms used by the Rikugun and the Riko Sentai. That's the Army and Special Naval Landing Force. The Type 14 Nambu, like the Type 38, also had a 20-year service from the 20s to the end of the war. It's been mistaken, even up to this day, it's been called the Japanese Luger. Well, there is no commonality between the Type 14 and a PO8 Luger, none whatsoever. It fires an 8mm round, which many gun experts say that's kind of anemic and underperforming, but the pistol is still a very reliable sidearm usually issued to Japanese officers and NCOs. Now, the other type Nambu pistol, Tsukuyin Kyuju 94, this wasn't a very aesthetic looking handgun, as you can see. In fact, it had some issues. The 94, like the 99 rifle, also was issued from 1939, came about in 1939 till the end of the war. I don't know if it was because of the problems with the materials they use or the manufacturing, but the 94 had a weak sear to it, meaning that, let's say if you're trying to eject a round by grasping the slide of the 94, if you grasp it too hard, put too much pressure on one part of the slide, if there's a round in the chamber, you will set that weapon off. So, not very good for the shooter. In the latter stages of the war, This is another 99, also in 7.7 caliber. During the latter stages of the war, around 1944-45, they had these 99 rifles known as the last ditch. What happened was Japan was lacking in the many materials. They're cut off from their empire from the very deadly and effective naval blockade done by the U.S. Navy submarine services, and then you start having B-29s just carpet bombing Japanese industry. So they had these cottage industries making these what called last-ditch 99s, made very substandard. They didn't even have the folding adjustable rear sight, just a simple peep sight to it, and it was very inaccurate. And then they did in some type. This one here had a buttstock, but then most of them didn't even have a buttstock. It just had 2-3 nails driven into the stock. A lot of times, the Dodge Ditch 99 was more dangerous to the shooter than it was to the enemy. Okay, then this one here, it's a Japanese hand grenade. It's a ceramic grenade. Unlike some of the grenades you see Allied forces use where you pull a pin and there is a lever, safety lever to it, the Japanese grenade is a little different. There's an initiator pin you pull, but then you also have, there's an initiator in the bottom where you have to tap it in the side of your helmet or your rifle stock that way to get the fuse lit up. The latter stages of the war, they had these ceramic grenades. They almost look like the type of grenades you see from the 1800s that grenadiers use. Again, because a lot of it was from the lack of materials. There was just lack of materials. The Japanese Empire was cut off from their colonies in Korea and in the Dutch East Indies. So material-wise, they were lacking in many materials. So mosey on here. So basically right there, that closes out what we have in the museum. Again, this is not a representation of all the Japanese weapons. These are just what we have in the museum, the rifles, the 2 sidearm pistols, some of the Japanese grenades that the naval infantry, not any of the infantry, but the Special Naval Landing Force and the Japanese Army used during World War II. So,
well, thank you very much. I have to ask one question. Why did I see a lot of movies where the Japanese rifle has a huge bayonet on it? What was the reason for that?
Well, some of the Type 99 rifles, for example, the Type 99s, had a folding bayonet to it, and then out of it, I think it's just from tradition, because it was for close quarter combat. It's no different than Allied soldiers with bayonets. Also, the bayonets were used for close quarter combat when they conduct banzai charges and things like that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Nell, what weapons are we checking out next?
Well, this is an example. Again, this is not the entire representation of the German and Italian weapons, but this is just part of it right here. Amongst the Axis forces, this is the Italian rifle, Carcano. Again, like the Japanese, they had 2 calibers. This one was a 7.35 by 51 millimeter Carcano rifle, and another one was also a similar caliber like the Type 38. It was a 6.5 Carcano rifle. That rifle, for a lot of people who are familiar with weaponry, know that the 6.5 Carcano was used by Lee Harvey Oswald to assassinate President John F. Kennedy.
And which rifle was that? This one?
It was this rifle right here. So this is the 6.5 by 52 Carcano rifle. Again, like the kind of rifle that was used by Lee Harvey Oswald to assassinate President Kennedy. And it was used throughout the war, even during the early conflicts during the 30s when Italian forces had invaded Abyssinia, which is now modern Ethiopia, in the 1930s. So let's move on to the other Axis forces.
Okay.
We'll start off with the German weapons. This is the standard rifle of the German military, whether it's the Wehrmacht, the Waffen SS, the Luftwaffe ground units, and yes, the German Air Force had ground forces. They had infantry, armor, and artillery. And this was the Mauser. Mauser 98K. The K stood for Kurz, meaning short. It's no different than the Mauser rifle used in World War I, only it's shorter than its World War I counterpart. And it's bolt action fed by a 5-round stripper clip, like you see here. You open the bolt, you drop 5 rounds in there, and then when you push, and then you can just remove the stripper clip, and then when you reset the weapon forward, put it in battery, it will load the round.
And this is the stripper clip here.
That is a stripper clip right there. That metal piece that's holding the base of those rounds, that is called a stripper clip. And this is the type of round that they use on the Mauser, 7.92 by 57, also known as 8mm long.
Okay.
And then the other German weapon we have here, the 2 common sidearms of the German military. The P08 Luger in 9mm parabellum, which means war, and the P38 made by Walther, also 9mm. Now this weapon is known as the Sturmgewehr. It's what retired Army Special Operator Larry Vickers called the weapon that made the M1 Garand obsolete. What's unique about the Sturmgewehr is it's considered today the modern basis of today's assault rifles because it fires what's called an intermediate caliber round, a round in between a pistol and a full battle rifle. The reason why it was called Sturmgewehr, loose translation to storm rifles, because the Germans really didn't know what else to call it. It was originally called the MP-43, Machine Pistol 43 and Machine Pistol 44. They tried to hide it from Hitler, who didn't want any introduction of new rifles into the theaters in both West and the East. So they hid it from Hitler that this was basically a new submachine gun. Well, when the cat came out of the bag and Hitler found out about it, they gave him a demonstration, and Hitler finally said, go ahead, go in production. But they didn't make enough of these Sturmgewehrs to really make a difference. Only less than 500,000 Sturmgewehrs were made. Now, if you notice that kind of resembles a rifle today that a lot of people know as the AK-47. Well, Kalashnikov really did not copy the Sturmgewehr to make the AK-47. However, he did later on admit he was influenced by the Sturmgewehr in making the AK-47. And they shared a similar intermediate caliber cartridge. And this one is 7.92 by 33, known as 8mm short.
Wow. Now, what's the P38?
The P38 is a later model handgun issued to the German military, to both infantry, Waffen SS, military police, and then again, Luftwaffe ground forces.
Now, which pistol was used more often? Because in war movies, you really only see the Luger. But
the Luger is used. It was used primarily in World War I, but the P38, they both had equal uses. But a lot of people like the P38 more because it had a slide safety there, and it was what's called a double action feature to it.
Okay. Well, is that it for our World War II German and Axis weapons?
I think that's it for right now for all our Axis weapons.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Nell, where are we now?
Well, right now, this is a display of the Allied weapons we have from Great Britain and from the Soviet Union. The most common British rifles used by the British Royal Army and Royal Marines were these Lee Enfield bolt-action rifles. They were introduced in service in 1895. They first saw service during the Boer conflict against South African guerrillas in 1899 during the turn of the 20th century. They had 2 models. They had the standard Lee Enfield here that fired a .303 round. That's similar to the Japanese Type 99. It was fed by the tactical 10-round box magazine. And he had this carbine version here that came out later in the war. It's called the short magazine Lee Enfield, SMLE acronym. A lot of troops called it SMELLY for short. The carbine was used a lot of times in the jungle fighting during the China-Burma-India theater, especially when the 14th Army was fighting against the Japanese. And it served from 1895 till 1957 until it was replaced by the Belgian-made FN FAL, Fabrique Nationale Fusil Automatique La Guerre. It was a select fire rifle, fired both semi-automatic and full automatic, similar to the Sturmgewehr, which was also select fire, which fired both semi and full automatic. Now the bottom here were the common Soviet weapons known as the Mosin Nagant. Like the Lee Enfield, it was developed during the late 19th century, the late 1800s, around 1891 or so. And again, it saw service until it was replaced by the AK-47 in the late 40s and early 50s. Fired a 7.62 by 54 millimeter round. And some people think, well, is that the same as 308 NATO? Says no, 308 NATO is 7.62 by 51 millimeter. It was used as both a battle rifle and a sniper rifle as well by the Soviet forces. In fact, the top scoring Soviet sniper ace, Vasily Zaitsev, used a Mosin Nagant rifle during the fighting in the Eastern Front. The top sniper in the world is a Finnish sniper. I can't pronounce his name, but during the Winter War of 1939-1940, when Finland was fighting the Soviet Union for 3 months, he also carried both a Russian design and a Finnish design Mosin Nagant rifle, and in the 100 days of fighting, scored over 500 kills against the Soviet invaders.
Wow. Well, I guess I have to ask, I'm stumbling, did he have a scope on that, or was he using open sights?
Well, Vasily Zaitsev used a scope. It was a low-powered 1.5 by 2 powered PU scope. Simo Hayahe, if I pronounced the Finnish sniper right, he did not use a scope. The reason why he did not use a scope is he was afraid that the glint from the lens, if the sunlight glanced off the lens, he was afraid the reflection might give him away to a Soviet sniper who might be sitting there hunting him down. So Zaitsev used a scope, it was a low-powered scope, whereas Simo Hayahe used standard iron sights.
All right. Well, I gather that's it for our Allied troops. Now, how about our Americans?
Okay, well, let's go over here.
All right. All right, so now we're at the American weapons section.
Well, here we are. This is just a small representation of the American weaponry that was carried by our GIs and Marines. On the top here, you have 2 models of the Thompson submachine gun that was invented by Brigadier General John Thompson. Had World War I had gone into 1919 to maybe up to the early 20s, John Thompson was hoping that these weapons would be used as trench sweepers against the German forces. But it wasn't developed in time for that. So the war ended in 1918 before Thompson managed to get his weapons in the hands of Allied forces. The 2 models here, for example, this one on this model here, well, the one on the other side you see with a drum magazine. It's a 1921 model. The 1921 model could be fed by both 20, 30 round regular stick magazines or 1,500 round drum magazines. And to know the difference between the 21 model, you see the forward hand grip on the front.
Yeah.
Okay. These weapons.
And then you have the vertical.
Right. This one here, just a regular hand guard. This is the 1928 model, and you can notice too, the flash suppressor is different from that model and this model. Like the 21 model, the 28 model can be fed by stick magazines or drums. The trouble with drum magazines is they're very unreliable. It causes a lot of stoppages, not only from the 1921 Thompson, but the Russian Pepeshov 41 submachine gun, and its Finnish copy, the Suomi, also had these drum magazines that held like 70 rounds, but they were prone to a lot of jamming, and drum magazines are very difficult and complicated to reload. The latter version of the Thompson submachine gun came about later in the war, known as the M1. A lot of weapons, American designation, have been given the M1 designator. The M1 version The charging handle, instead of on top, was on the right-hand side. It did not have this ribbed barrel to it. It had a regular straight hand guard, and it can only be fed by 20 and 30 round box magazines. The bottom here, a facsimile. This is a facsimile. Again, these are all facsimiles. This is a facsimile of the M1 Garand, invented by John C. Garand, a Canadian-American inventor. It was also an engineer. This is the rifle that General George Patton called the greatest battle implement ever devised. It fired a 30-06 caliber round. It was fed by this, what's called an N block clip. It is an 8-round N block clip. More than 5 million of these M1 Garands were made during the Second World War. Now, contrary to popular belief, even though a lot of GIs and Marines were equipped with it, the difference between this and other semi-automatic rifles like the SVT-40 that the Soviet Union had, the German Gewehr 41 and 43, this was standard issue, whereas the SVT-40, the G41 and G43 were issued only to special purpose troops. Like the Sturmgewehr, it was only issued to special purpose troops.
I have a question. My Uncle Richard, he's passed away, but he used to say that a lot of the privates had, in boot camp, had the M1 thumb. What was that?
The M1 thumb is, well, when the last round is fired, the bolt slides back and locks into position. And then the end block clip, it flips out. So what happens is when you reload the end block clip into the very top, you've got to be very careful, because if you push down and not careful enough, the charging handle will go forward, and sometimes your thumb gets stuck on the bolt while it's trying to go in the battery.
And I gather that stings.
That stings.
Thank you.
And then another rifle here. This was the M1 carbine. This is the M1 carbine. Contrary to popular belief, it is not a carbine version of the M1 Garand. Though it's 30 caliber, it is not the same 30-06 caliber as the M1 Garand. This fires like the Sturmgewehr, an intermediate cartridge, 7.62 by 33. This was supposedly originally developed for people who are not gunfighters, not in the infantry, for tank crew, artillery crew, radio men, or signalers, as the British and Commonwealth forces call them, cooks, bakers, clerks. That way, instead of having just a standard 1911-45, you have this lightweight M1 carbine. Later on, when the infantry saw that, hey, we like this carbine, it's light, has a decent muzzle velocity of up to 2,000 feet per second, has a good effective range of up to 275 meters or 300 yards. And the 15-round magazines, it's easy to load and easy to reload on the M1 carbine. In fact, this was the favorite captured American weapon that the Germans like to use.
Wow.
And I mean, the M1 carbine has its detractors, but it has a lot of good points to it. The carbine, believe it or not, was actually the most widely produced shoulder-fired weapon in the entire Second World War. People think it's the M1 Garand. No. 5.5 million M1 Garands were made. Over 6 million carbines were made. So, and then another thing, a lot of gun people think that, well, the M1 carbine influenced the Ruger Mini 14 that came out in the 1970s. No, it didn't. In fact, it's the M1 Garand. If it wasn't for the M1 Garand, you wouldn't have the AK-47, you wouldn't have the M14, and you wouldn't have the Ruger Mini 14. In fact, when I said earlier about the Sturmgewehr that Mikhail Kalashnikov said that he was, later on admitted he was influenced by it, he actually took the gas operating system of the M1 Garand and put it into the AK-47, only upside down.
Wow, okay. My Uncle Richard, I have pictures of him on his Stuart tank with a grease gun on his side.
Yes. We have a facsimile here of the M3 submachine gun, Obviously called a grease gun for obvious reason. It looked like a mechanic's tool. The United States forces, when they saw the British using these Sten guns, these cheap $12 Sten guns made of stamped steel and tubing, and it was a very effective weapon, well, the M1 Thompsons were very expensive to make. Upwards up, and even back then, $250 to make a Thompson, it's like $4,000 today. They needed a submachine gun that was cheaper to make and mass produce. So they were influenced by the British Sten gun. And then they came up with the M3 submachine gun. Later on, there was an M3A1 version. The difference between the two is the M3, if you see the charging handle, it looks like a lever device, like a cranking lever. Well, there were some problems with that. If some troops get hung up on vines, wire, or whatever, and it's easily damaged. So later on, the M3A1 was developed. It didn't see much action in the Second World War, but it did see some action during the Korean and Vietnam War in the hands of recon teams from MACV-SOG. The M3A1, instead of that cranking lever device, when you open the dust cover on it, on the bolt, there's a divot in it where you take your finger and use that to charge the weapon, to cock the weapon. The M3, even though it was declared obsolete by 1959, it went on to serve in Vietnam with these units known as MACV-SOG. They had an integral silencer or suppressor, and in the close quarter jungle fightings of Vietnam, it was very ideal in close quarter combat. And then, in fact, the grease gun would also become one of the first weapons adopted by the Delta Force in 1977, 1978. It went on to serve actually well into the 90s in the first Gulf War, used by tanker troops, by tanker crew. They use it basically, tankers are not known to be gunfighters, they're not infantrymen. So if your tank gets knocked out, what you do with your grease gun or your carbine, you use it to break contact with the enemy. You're not there to have a stand-up fight, you're not an infantryman.
All right. Well, does that conclude our World War II weapons room?
I believe so. That pretty much covers, again, this is just a small percentage of what troops use in both Allied and Axis forces used in World War II.
Well, I'd like to say thank you very much for letting me come back and make this video with you. A lot of people mentioned that I didn't have you do this prior to the last time, but we only have so much time. So thank you again, and we are at the Maryland Veterans Museum at Patriot Park, Newburgh, Maryland.